Hello and welcome to the Global Dialogue for Justice Year 6, and we are on day 7 of this important, timely, and necessary dialogue. Today, let us turn our focus to the unrelenting and systematic human rights violations suffered by KHK victims and their families in Turkey since July 15, 2016, as highlighted by Dr. Bayram Erzurumoğlu on day 3 of this global community forum that took place on July 7. These violations are not only ongoing, they have become institutionalized, forming a parallel regime of injustice that defies both Turkish constitutional law and international human rights standards. The KHK decree law regime has created a reality in which basic rights and freedoms are reversed, denied, or brutally stripped away. Dr. Erzurumoğlu reminds us that the presumptions of innocence, a cornerstone of modern justice, was flipped. Victims were assumed guilty without trial, subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, and in many cases, torture and degrading treatment. In his presentations, he outlined the categories of rights violations decree law victims have endured, each of which echoes a failure of international commitments: right to a fair trial and equality before the law, right to work and livelihood, right to social security and health, right to education, freedom of expression and belief. The State of Emergency Inquiry Commission, established to offer justice, became instead a mechanism of delay and denial, extending suffering up to 5 years for countless victims. Justice was not delivered, it was deliberately postponed or outright denied. It is crucial to understand that this is not just a Turkish problem. This is a global justice crisis, one where the international community must decide whether it will tolerate the collective punishment of innocent people under the guise of national security. Let us carry this truth into every corner of the world. Let us stand with the KHK victims, and let us declare without hesitation: human rights are not conditional. They are universal, indivisible, and non negotiable. It is a great pleasure and a profound honor to bring you back our esteemed and beloved professor, Dr. Bayram Erzurumoğlu.
Basically, the human rights and freedoms violations suffered by the KHK victims, including their extended family members in Turkey or Turkey, since the 15th of July 2016 is still going on in full force and full action. And it looks like to be going on non-stop as usual unless the regime loses its power or change its mind, obviously. But in the short term, we don't expect any change, of course. I can positively say that the government policies and practices based on the KHKs systematically violated almost all rights and freedoms contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and many other international human rights instruments, such as the United Nations Covenant on the Right of Child. You might wonder, how will they violate the right of child? We will see the details shortly. These covenants affirm that all human rights are inherent, universal, and indivisible to the dignity of every human person. But our political Islamist government obviously do not agree with those international law as they contradict to their political Islamist ideology. Those human rights violations suffered by KHK victims can be categorized as follows. I categorize them according to human rights listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other covenants I mentioned earlier. Uh, first, first violation is violation of the right to be considered innocent until proven guilty. Well, KHK victims were treated guilty until they proved their innocence. So the law was turned upside down. Uh, I will just reading those violations will take a lot of time, so they will not. I will not be getting into the details too much, but we can talk these things in another special program, basically. Second, right to freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention. Well, KHK victims were arrested, detained, and then their indictments or other, uh, how should I say, proofs or evidences followed after that. Third violation was right to protection from torture and degrading treatment. Well, all KHK victims were tortured and met with degrading treatment as standard, uh, as reported in my and plus many other international human rights reports. Uh, Fourth was right to access to justice. The KHK victims were banned from access to justice initially by the KHKs. And since this was found unacceptable by the European Court of Human Rights or United Nations Human Rights Committee, this and that, then uh, then a committee was set up called State of Emergency Inquiry Commission. It was set up to shorten the injustice suffered by KHK victims. But it served, the State of Emergency Inquiry Commission served to delay access to justice of KHK victims to another, depending on the date of their decision, up to 5 years. So the State of Emergency Commission was supposed to shorten the injustice suffered by the KHK victims, but it was used to lengthen the injustice suffered by the KHK victims up to 5 years. Interesting. Another violation was suffered by right to equality before the law. No, KHK victims were considered as terrorists by definition, so they were treated in that way. So they were labeled terrorists, suspects, usual suspects. So their rights and freedoms were restricted accordingly. They were not treated equally before the law. Before the law, they were not. They didn't accept. They didn't receive fair trials. They didn't get uh, proper right to work because they were banned from working in any government offices, plus even in private sectors. Uh, if somehow the victims found some jobs in private sectors, social security officials either visited those businesses or phoned the managers or directors of those businesses to dismiss those workers. Otherwise, they will be visited by some tax officials or some other inspectors so that their businesses could be shut down or fined or punished in some other ways. So that many businesses frightened, hesitated to employ KHK victims. Those kind of operations are still going on. How do we know it? We get complaints to uh, to some human rights activists. That is why. And the one of other violation was right to just and favorable condition of work, because KHK victims were treated as not equal as usual suspects by the regime. Uh, they gave a code called Code 36 to social security records of KHK victims. So any employer who saw that Code 36, it was obvious, open. It was said that this person was dismissed from his job by KHK. Somehow, not being able to stand against those complaints that the government has changed open record to Code 36. We know what 36 means. So when an employer dismissed a worker using that Code 36, so courts, any government offices, officials, any person in the know would know that that person uh, would not be treated, defended uh, uh, according to law. I mean, according to proper law. But according to KHK law, yes, they had no right anyway. So that uh, they were they were uh, treated as subhuman somehow from the beginning, and they didn't have proper right to life. Why? Because they lost their social security benefits. They lost their social security rights. So that if they had any treatment going on, let's say through cancer, for cancer, or any other illnesses, uh, so their treatment was cut off, so that they could safely die, surely die, and the government didn't care for it anyway. Uh, right to form and join trade unions was obviously another violation. KHK victims couldn't support, so sorry, were not allowed to set up a trade union, or some of them were uh, thrown out of their trade unions, depending on which kind of trade unions they joined, or some trade unions um, accepted them as members were shut down anyway. See, uh, they didn't have right to peaceful assembly. If somehow two or three of them came together, they were arrested, mistreated, uh, straight away, straight away. Uh, freedom of association was no for them anyway. They didn't have right to privacy because their phones, their communications were followed, recorded, listened as usual. Their right to education was another violation for them. We have got one person among this group, and now I do not say who it is, but if she would like to explain that it was her that her right to education was violated, she could explain herself. If let's say PhD students or graduate student, undergraduate students were names in the KHK victims, their education were cut off. They were thrown out from their universities. They're thrown out from their uh, educational programs or another things. Their bursaries uh, were cut off. Anybody who supported them gave them some sort of educational support. They were treated as supporting terrorism or terrorists, so that their economic support was cut off, basically. Uh, uh, KHK victims didn't have freedom of opinion or expression. If they, let's say, printed some books or articles or expressed their views on government policies and practices in the country, uh, their books, their websites, their publications were banned more or less straight away. Uh, so their freedom of religion and belief is another violation item. Uh, well, if let's say if they were Muslims, obviously they could choose any religion if they like. But if they were Muslims, they wouldn't be accepted as Muslims. They would be named, called, that uh, treated as infidels in the minds of those political Islamists, plus those people who subscribed to their ideology. Uh, uh, for example, if a KHK victim asked for the way to Kaaba, they would just straight say that, look, for us Kaaba is that way, but we don't know your Kaaba is which way. So that they abused KHK victims as, you are not Muslim, you are not a true believer. If you are not with us, if you didn't subscribe, if you didn't if you didn't sub, subscribe to our uh, uh, worldview. So if KHK victims somehow participated in elections, they sometimes they were allowed to participate in election. Then, if they won the election, they were banned from gaining to their post straight away. In a sense, they were tricked to enter the election. If they won, then they were not declared as the winners. And there are tens of examples. So they were sometimes, as I told you, tricked to enter. Sometimes they were banned straight away. Uh, their right to family, most of the time, were denied. I will not be going into details. Their children were treated as children of the terrorists, so that uh, if they were allowed to live long enough, would be terrorists. If they died, if the children had died, uh, they could be how should I say called a would be terrorist uh, is well disappeared. Yes, a would be terrorist disappeared from the face of earth. So they were happy. They the right to adequate standard of living denied for the KHK victims, as they lost their income from work. If somehow somebody gave to their charities to the victims, they were treated as as supporting terrorists and terrorism, uh, uh, so that nobody, hardly anybody, could give KHK victims any work or social, some sort of social solidarity support. The state didn't give them any support anyway, so that in a sense they were actually left destitute, so that they could, should, and would die of hunger or malnutrition, this and that. Uh, so this was another violation of their right. They didn't get equal protection from the law, as you will guess from the previous articles. Uh, some of them were subjected to enforced disappearances. Their right to liberty and security uh, was not accepted, because they were usual suspects anyway. They were subjected to systematic defamation and harassment, and their uh, their economic rights were violated, as you would guess from the previous article. They were their their social rights were violated, as you will guess from the previous articles. Uh, they didn't have proper rights to participate in cultural life, because they were banned from setting up societies or joining societies, or even school associations. So, I mean, as parents, and then they were punished collectively for supposed to be crime of others. Let's say a father is labeled as terrorist by the KHKs. Then his wife, his children, his brothers, his sisters, his parents, grandparents could be could be punished. Their social security benefits could be cut off. Their educational support could be cut off. They could be they they, they could be actually uh, arrested for no reason, or supposed to be minor things. Uh, so they didn't have any protection from the law. Uh, they didn't have freedom of movement. They were followed if they let's say travel to border areas, or or they were banned entering uh, to some buildings, government buildings, this and that. That's why their freedom of movement was restricted quite highly. Their property rights were violated. Uh, some were confiscated, and there are some other examples. Let me tell you some information on this. Uh, some elderly people uh, donated their property after their death. That those property should go to some charities, so that they could support the the beneficiaries, maybe citizens or elderly, uh, that that could benefit from their donated property after their deaths. What happened? The government, after KHKs, confiscated those property while those people were alive, are alive. Okay. Then what happened? The government asked those people, look, this property is our property now. If you'd like to use this property while you are alive, you have got to either leave the property or pay rent to us. And this this didn't happen just once. This happened in many places. So this is no joke. So even some people donated their property to some labeled marked charities. They lost their property while they are alive, and this is no joke; it's reality. They obviously social, they lost obviously social security rights, as I mentioned earlier. They lost their right to health because of losing their social security issues, plus they losing their income, this and that. They were last violation, one of what they were forced into slave labor. Why? Because if they worked uh, in a registered business, in a registered work, as I told you before, the government official would call the business and then ask the manager, owner of the business, to dismiss those people. So HK victims felt that they had to work unregistered. It is an offense in the country, obviously. If somehow a business employed those people, uh, the employers wouldn't pay those unregistered workers their proper wage. You know, if even if they paid proper wage, since they looked like they are not working there, unemployed people, if let's say if they had some sort of accident on the work, they didn't have any rights to claim because they were not officially working for that business. And there are many other violations. I just listed just 35 of them and very quickly, and in details, these violations could amount to millions and billions of violations